Naya sat in the back seat of the sleek black limousine, her hands trembling slightly despite the cool air conditioning. The city lights blurred by as she tried to steady her breathing. Tonight was the night she would officially become Mrs. Liam Bellmont. Her heart pounded, whether from excitement or an underlying anxiety she couldn't quite name, she wasn't sure. The Bellmont family was famous in their circles, wealthy, philanthropic, and with a regal aura passed down through generations. Their estate was an imposing structure perched on a lush green hill, surrounded by tall iron gates and a winding driveway lined with sycamore trees. To the outside world, they were what fairy tales were made of, a glamorous legacy, a sprawling mansion, and a handsome heir. But from the moment she'd said yes to Liam's proposal, she had felt an odd tension hovering at the edges of their interactions. As the car pulled up to the entrance, she glimpsed her reflection in the side mirror. Her wedding gown, simple yet elegant, had been painstakingly tailored to highlight her graceful neck and slender figure. A small diamond necklace sparkled just above her collarbone, her something new, courtesy of Liam's mother, Evelyn Bellmont. Naya couldn't help noticing how Evelyn's cool gray eyes had lingered on her neck when she presented the necklace, as if calculating something. She brushed off the odd sensation and forced a smile as the driver opened her door. Family members milled about the front yard, congratulating one another on the big day. Liam emerged from a corner, his tailored suit fitting him perfectly, his blue eyes bright. He took Naya's hand. "Ready for the beginning of our forever?" he asked. Naya nodded, her gaze drifting to the front doors, which loomed like silent guardians of the Bellmont secrets. She ignored the small knot in her stomach and stepped inside. She would soon learn that not all families welcome new members with open arms, and the Bellmonts, though polished on the surface, had more than a few skeletons to hide. The wedding ceremony itself was a grand affair, crystal chandeliers, white roses in towering vases, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. Guests whispered about Naya's radiant beauty and Liam's unwavering devotion. By all outward appearances, the day was perfect. Yet, the tension that had gnawed at Naya since her engagement grew stronger with every toast and polite congratulation. Halfway through the reception, she excused herself to the powder room. Just outside, a tall blonde woman in a satin dress leaned against the wall, cradling a glass of champagne. There was something haunted in the woman's eyes as they flicked over Naya's wedding gown. "You're the new Mrs. Bellmont, I presume?" the woman said, voice slightly slurred. Naya forced a polite smile. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The woman let out a soft laugh, devoid of real humor. "Help me? No." She paused, taking a long sip of champagne. "But I'd like to give you some advice, though I doubt you'll want it." Naya frowned, her grip tightening around her bouquet. "What do you mean?" The woman stepped closer, glancing around as if to ensure no one else was listening. "This family, they're not what they seem." She leaned in, her breath warm on Naya's ear. "Watch your back. The Bellmonts protect their own." Before Naya could respond, Liam appeared from around the corner. "Oh, there you are," he said, relief coloring his tone. His eyes darted to the blonde woman with a flicker of annoyance, as though her presence was unwelcome. "Is everything all right?" Naya nodded hastily. "Yes, just heading to the powder room." The blonde woman gave Naya a meaningful, pitying look and sauntered away, champagne flute in hand. A shiver ran down Naya's spine. She tried to shake off the warning, attributing it to jealousy or bitterness from an ex. When she returned to the bridal suite to change her shoes, her heart nearly stopped. Her wedding dress lay spread out on a velvet bench, the train slashed in 3 distinct diagonal cuts, as if by a sharp blade. Her breath caught in her throat. Panic rose within her. There was no note, no immediate explanation, just a silent message slashed across the fabric that had adorned her minutes before. She clenched her fists, determined not to let it ruin the celebration. It was probably a bizarre prank, she told herself. She would move forward. Yet, as she rejoined the party, the warning echoed in her mind, "Watch your back. The Bellmonts protect their own." Married life began smoothly enough, or so it appeared. The grandeur of the Bellmont mansion was now Naya's home, an endless expanse of rooms, corridors, and hidden alcoves, each decorated with antiques and family portraits. From the outside, it looked like a dream come true. But soon, strange things started happening. A week after the wedding, Naya woke up feeling lightheaded. She first chalked it up to stress from the move and the flurry of honeymoon arrangements. But the dizziness worsened. She stumbled in the hallway, nearly collapsing as a rush of nausea overtook her. Liam was quick to help, supporting her on his arm. Evelyn insisted on calling the family doctor, who prescribed vitamin supplements. Day after day, however, Naya's condition didn't improve. Her vision sometimes blurred, and she lost large chunks of time, moments where she couldn't recall entire conversations or how she had wandered from one room to another. Late one night, she swore she heard hushed voices outside her bedroom door, but when she got up to investigate, no one was there. The next morning, as she sipped her tea, something gritty brushed against her lips. She glanced down. White particles clung to the bottom of the porcelain cup. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hardly hear herself think. She placed the cup on the saucer with trembling hands, quietly left the room, and then returned moments later to find the teacup gone, already whisked away by the butler. Naya confronted the butler calmly. "Where did you put my tea?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. He gave her a polite, aloof smile. "I disposed of it, ma'am. I was told to clean up as soon as possible." She wanted to ask who instructed him, but Liam appeared, offering a concerned frown. "Sweetheart, you look pale. Let's get you back to bed," he said, steering her away. She couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at her. If not for the strange pills, she might have dismissed everything as a misunderstanding. But now, a deeper fear settled in her chest. She resolved to stay vigilant. Perhaps this was all in her head, she reasoned. But a small voice inside her whispered that something far more sinister was at work, something the Bellmont family didn't want her to uncover. The Bellmont mansion staff was vast: cooks, butlers, groundskeepers, and housemaids who bustled about at every hour, ensuring every corner sparkled. Naya tried to learn their names and routines, hoping to connect with the people who kept the estate running. It was during one of these friendly interactions that she got her first concrete hint. She was in the kitchen, rummaging for a snack, still feeling slightly dizzy from a long day. A young housemaid, who had just been hired, nearly bumped into her while carrying a tray of cups. The tray rattled, and the girl hastily set it down. "Oh, Mrs. Bellmont, I'm so sorry," the maid stammered, avoiding eye contact. "It's all right," Naya said kindly. She noticed the maid trembling, her eyes darting to the corridor leading toward the pantry. "You must be new here. What's your name?" "Sarah," the maid answered. She looked like she was about to say something else but pursed her lips instead. Naya remembered the gritty residue she'd discovered in her tea. The memory made her voice waver. "Sarah," she began gently, "have you noticed anything unusual in the kitchen? Anything that's not part of the standard routine?" Sarah's face went pale. She fiddled with the hem of her apron before blurting out, "They told me not to ask questions about what's in the kitchen, especially not the powders." She froze, realizing she'd said too much. I mean, I really shouldn't." Naya felt a surge of adrenaline. "Powders? Who told you not to ask questions?" Sarah lowered her voice to a near whisper. "I don't want to lose my job." She glanced nervously at the door, then busied herself with wiping the counter. "I should get back to work." The maid walked away hurriedly, leaving Naya alone with her thoughts. There was a smothering sense of foreboding in the air. Someone was putting something in Naya's tea, and the housemaid had inadvertently revealed that it was common knowledge, at least among those who worked in the mansion, that certain powders were off-limits to discuss. Suddenly, the memory of that blonde woman at the wedding rushed back to her. Naya couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Something was wrong in the Bellmont household, and it was centered around her. Bellmont Manor was older than any living Bellmont. Generations of expansions and renovations had added extra wings, hidden passages, and a labyrinthine basement that housed everything from vintage wine to old furniture. Normally, Naya wouldn't have ventured down to the basement, especially when it was always described as just old wine storage. But after the revelations in the kitchen, she felt compelled to explore. Late one evening, while Liam was out attending a business function with his father, Naya descended the creaking staircase leading to the basement. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and a musty smell filled the air. She passed rows of wine bottles carefully placed on racks, their labels faded with time. A single overhead bulb flickered. She almost turned back, her nerves jangling, but then she saw a locked door at the far end of the corridor. It was made of heavy oak, fortified with a modern keypad lock. Odd. Why would there be a keypad in an old wine cellar? She tried jiggling the handle. Nothing. The keypad blinked red. She leaned in to examine it, pressing a few random numbers, but it remained stubbornly locked. A wave of disappointment and unease washed over her. What were the Bellmonts hiding behind that door? As she turned to leave, she heard a faint sound, footsteps above. Heart pounding, she flicked off the overhead bulb and crept behind a stack of crates. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. A pool of light spilled into the room. She held her breath as Evelyn stepped into view, dressed in a silk robe, her face illuminated by the glow of a small flashlight. Evelyn approached the locked door, typed in a code, and disappeared inside. A minute later, she re-emerged carrying something, Naya couldn't quite see what, then locked the door again. The footsteps receded up the stairs, leaving Naya trembling in the dark. The next morning, she hid a small, motion-activated camera on a shelf across from the locked door, hoping to record any future visits. If there was a secret in this basement, she was determined to uncover it. A few days later, Naya and Liam shared a quiet afternoon in the estate's sunroom. She was flipping through a bridal magazine, pretending to be absorbed by wedding gown trends, while Liam scrolled through his phone. When he excused himself briefly, leaving his phone on the table, it buzzed with a new message. She glanced at the screen, her curiosity piqued. The preview read, "It has to look natural. Like food poisoning. Just like with her." Then the rest of the text disappeared behind the phone's lock screen. Her stomach twisted into knots. When Liam returned, she tried to appear casual. "Everything all right?" she asked, forcing a light tone. He smiled, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Just some business stuff. Nothing to worry about." She studied his expression. For a moment, she thought she saw a flash of guilt in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a reassuring grin. That night, when Liam was soundly asleep, Naya took the phone from the nightstand. The text message app was locked with a password. She considered trying to guess it but felt a pang of guilt at invading his privacy. Yet, the message's content, something about making it look natural, referencing food poisoning, and the ominous phrase "just like with her," filled her with dread. She returned the phone to its place, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions. Who was her? And why mention food poisoning in such a callous way? Liam had never given her reason to distrust him before, but the evidence was mounting. She wondered if she was married to a man with dark secrets, or worse, if he was complicit in something far more lethal. Unable to shake her growing suspicions, Naya dedicated the following morning to research. She knew Liam had an older brother named Marcus who had passed away years ago. Marcus's first wife, Isabel, had died as well, under vague circumstances. The family rarely spoke of her, brushing off inquiries with somber expressions and vague comments about a tragic illness. Armed with the household's archives and old newspaper clippings, Naya dug into the Bellmont family history. She discovered a single obituary notice for Isabel Bellmont, dated 3 years prior. The cause of death was listed as sudden complications, with no further details. Not a single note about an autopsy or an investigation. A cold sweat clung to Naya's skin. The parallels to her own experience were unnerving: mysterious illnesses, hush-hush circumstances, and an abrupt end. The more she read, the more convinced she became that Isabel had been a casualty of something sinister. She found an old photograph in a dusty album, Isabel, smiling brightly on her wedding day, wearing a gown nearly identical to the one Naya had worn. Standing beside her were Marcus and Evelyn, both looking proud. In the corner of the photo, a shadowy figure hovered, almost out of frame, but recognizable as Liam. He was younger then, his face devoid of the warmth she was used to seeing. Suddenly, an unshakable notion took root in Naya's mind. Was the entire family implicated in Isabel's death? Had her own husband played a part? Though it felt unimaginable, the faint memory of that wedding day warning echoed once more. Watch your back. The Bellmonts protect their own. If the Bellmonts had conspired once, they could certainly do it again. This time, the victim might be Naya. The tension in the mansion rose sharply when Evelyn summoned Naya to a Bellmont women's brunch in the ornate garden pavilion. Naya had skipped the previous invitation, claiming a migraine, and Liam had been furious at her lack of participation. Now, with suspicions swirling, she decided it was better to comply, albeit on her own terms. She prepared carefully, choosing a simple outfit that could conceal a small button camera she'd purchased online. If something suspicious happened, she wanted a record of it. On the morning of the brunch, she pinned the device inside her blouse, checking twice that it was hidden. As she walked into the sunlit pavilion, she noted Evelyn's imperious posture at the head of the table. Several other female relatives, cousins, aunts, and wives, were already seated, sipping tea from delicate porcelain cups. The atmosphere was polite but suffocating. She could sense an undercurrent of tension when Evelyn's hawk-like gaze swept over her, as though searching for a crack in her composure. "Welcome, Naya," Evelyn said with a gracious smile. "I'm glad you decided to join us." Naya forced a soft laugh, taking a seat. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, placing her hands calmly in her lap. Liam wasn't present, this was strictly a women's gathering. Yet Naya felt he was there in spirit, hovering in the corners of her mind. She remembered the text on his phone and braced herself for whatever the meal might bring. As the servers laid out elaborate dishes of fruit, pastries, and mini sandwiches, Naya spotted her usual cup of tea being poured by a maid. Her heart sped up. She prayed the hidden camera was capturing every second. By the end of this brunch, she hoped to have answers about what the Bellmonts were really up to, and how they had orchestrated so many secrets under one roof. Determined not to miss a single detail, Naya made casual conversation, occasionally leaning forward to ensure the button cam had a clear line of sight. She asked the women about their daily routines, their experiences marrying into the family, and innocently inquired about family traditions. Throughout the brunch, Evelyn maintained her poised demeanor, although Naya picked up subtle glances, as if the matriarch was silently assessing her. At one point, Evelyn lightly touched Naya's hand. "My dear," she said, voice dripping with concern, "you've looked so unwell these past few weeks. I do hope you're feeling better today." Naya's pulse quickened. "Much better, thank you," she said, forcing a smile. "I suppose I just needed some rest." Across the table, one of the cousins, Marjorie, shifted uneasily. She tossed Evelyn a hesitant glance, then back to Naya. There was something about her expression, a flicker of sympathy or guilt, that made Naya's skin prickle. As the brunch progressed, Naya's mind churned. She mentally catalogued every suspicious glance, every forced smile. The hidden camera was capturing it all, the battery indicator on her phone, which served as a remote monitor, showing a steady recording. When the final tray of pastries was cleared, Evelyn clinked a spoon against her teacup. The conversation halted. "Before we conclude," Evelyn said with a tight-lipped smile, "I want to share a special tradition. We have a special cup, an heirloom, that we usually offer to the newest member of the family." Naya's heart raced. So this was it, a moment they all seemed to anticipate. She carefully kept her expression neutral, hoping the camera was still rolling. The matriarch gestured to a server, who brought out a single porcelain teacup adorned with intricate floral patterns. It looked delicate, probably expensive. And it was just for her. Naya's fingers felt cold, despite the warm summer breeze drifting through the pavilion. The special teacup sat before her, glinting in the light. Evelyn's eyes were fixed on her, unwavering. "This cup is quite old," Evelyn said, resting her hand gently on Naya's shoulder. "It's been passed down for generations, from one Bellmont wife to another, symbolizing unity and acceptance." A hush fell over the table as a maid poured steaming tea into the heirloom cup. The other women wore polite expressions, but the tension in the air was palpable. Naya forced a gracious smile, carefully lifting the cup to her lips while trying not to let her hand shake. She feigned a small sip, barely letting the liquid touch her mouth. Her mind whirled as she recalled the gritty residue she had seen before. She couldn't risk ingesting whatever might be lurking in this special brew. Evelyn watched her intently. "How does it taste?" "It's lovely," Naya answered, forcing a cheerful tone. "Smooth and calming." She set the cup down gently. In that moment, she caught Liam's mother exchanging a glance with one of the aunts. She recognized the triumphant glimmer in Evelyn's eyes. This was it, the trap, the final step in a plan that had likely been in motion since the day Naya set foot in the mansion. As the brunch continued, small talk resumed, but Naya's mind stayed laser-focused. She had to keep the facade long enough to swap cups without anyone noticing. Her stomach churned at the thought of what might happen if she failed. She needed to be vigilant. All the while, the hidden camera beneath her blouse continued recording, capturing Evelyn's every smug tilt of the head, every knowing glance, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding that single, special teacup just for her. As the brunch wound down, Naya waited patiently for her chance. She noted every shift in conversation, every moment when eyes weren't on her. Finally, Evelyn turned to answer a question from an older aunt, and the other women looked away too. Seizing the opportunity, Naya quietly reached for Evelyn's own teacup, which sat half full beside her plate. In a swift motion, she swapped it with the special porcelain cup she had been given. The clink of cups was imperceptible beneath the chatter of voices and clattering dishes. Her heart pounded so hard she could almost hear her pulse in her ears. Any slip or loud sound could have given her away. But no one seemed to notice. When Evelyn turned back, she smiled, oblivious that the very poison intended for Naya was now in her own cup. The risk of discovery made Naya's palms sweat. She prayed that the hidden camera caught the switch, if only to have proof. She cast a quick glance at her phone's remote app. The camera still flashed red, recording. Relief swelled in her chest. Just as she settled back into her seat, Liam appeared at the doorway. His sudden presence jolted the women to attention. He surveyed the table, his gaze lingering on Naya. For a moment, she thought she saw confusion or concern flicker across his features, but then it vanished, replaced by a cordial smile. "Mother, ladies," he greeted, "enjoying yourselves?" Evelyn beckoned him over. "Come, Liam. Join us for a moment." He approached, taking a seat next to his mother. His eyes landed on Naya's porcelain cup, and for a split second, a shadow of apprehension crossed his face. Before he could speak, Evelyn reached for what she believed to be her own teacup, and took a dainty sip. Minutes later, the atmosphere in the pavilion changed abruptly. Evelyn's face drained of color, and she pressed a trembling hand to her temple. The conversation ceased, forks clattering onto plates as the other women turned to look. "Mother?" Liam asked urgently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Evelyn's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but only an anguished gasp emerged. She clutched the edge of the table, nearly knocking over her teacup. Her breathing grew labored, and sweat beaded on her forehead. Panic rippled around the pavilion. One of the aunts stood up, calling for help. Another rushed to Evelyn's side, trying to steady her. Naya stayed seated, her heart thudding like a jackhammer in her chest. Although she had orchestrated the switch, watching it unfold in real time made her feel queasy. She hadn't wanted to hurt anyone, but if they were truly plotting to poison her, she had seen no other way to protect herself. Evelyn's eyes locked on Naya with a look of bewildered betrayal. It was as though she realized, in her final moment of coherence, that Naya wasn't the naive victim they had expected. Before she could speak another word, her eyelids fluttered closed. Liam jumped to his feet, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. In the chaos, no one questioned why Naya remained unnaturally calm, not until later. For now, all eyes were on Evelyn, the proud Bellmont matriarch who had suddenly collapsed in front of her entire family. And in the back of Naya's mind, a small voice whispered, "This is only the beginning." Evelyn's collapse sent the Bellmont household into a frenzy. Paramedics raced onto the estate's manicured lawn while staff members scrambled to direct them to the pavilion. Liam knelt beside his mother, cradling her limp hand, his voice trembling as he pleaded, "Stay with us, Mom. Stay with us." Naya stood back, hands clasped tightly to keep from shaking. The hidden camera still clung to her blouse, capturing the chaos. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, guilt, relief, fear. Had she just turned the tables on a murderer, or had she become one herself? The paramedics loaded Evelyn onto a stretcher, hooking her up to oxygen and monitoring her vitals. As they rushed her toward the ambulance, Liam ran a hand through his hair in distress. His father, Harold Bellmont, arrived at the scene moments later, having been summoned from his study. His face contorted in horror at the sight of his wife being wheeled away, but there was something else there too, a spark of apprehension, as though he recognized the tragic script playing out before him. Liam spun toward Naya, eyes red. "You were with her right before she collapsed. Did she say anything? Did she complain about feeling sick?" He was desperate for an explanation that would make sense of what he'd just witnessed. Naya, heart racing, shook her head. She seemed fine one moment, and then, she just went pale. She willed herself to remain calm. If she showed too much anxiety, it might raise suspicions that she had orchestrated the switch. Neighbors and extended family members began to gather on the lawn, drawn by the sirens. A swirl of murmurs floated through the crowd, snippets of worry, confusion, and speculation. Naya felt every gaze flick in her direction, as though everyone sensed her unusual composure. When the ambulance disappeared through the iron gates, Liam took Naya's hand. "We need to get to the hospital," he said, voice ragged with emotion. Naya nodded, letting him lead her. But behind her mask of concern, she was already planning her next move, reviewing the hidden camera footage, ensuring she had evidence if the Bellmonts turned on her next. At the hospital, Evelyn was rushed into the emergency room. Time stretched like taffy as the family waited for any news. Liam paced the corridor, one hand rubbing the back of his neck. Harold stared at the floor, occasionally glancing at his watch. Several aunts clustered together, whispering prayers. Naya sat quietly, her mind churning with questions about what the doctors would find. Finally, a doctor emerged, still wearing latex gloves. His expression was grave. "We've stabilized her for now, but we found traces of a toxic substance in her system. Scopolamine." A hushed gasp moved through the group like a ripple. Liam's eyes darted to his father, then to Naya. "Scopo, what does that mean?" he asked, voice cracking. The doctor sighed. "Scopolamine is a rare toxin. It can be administered in very small doses and cause severe disorientation, hallucinations, and, in higher doses, cardiac complications. We need to inform the authorities. This kind of poisoning doesn't usually happen by accident." Police arrived soon after, asking to interview each member of the Bellmont household. Naya felt her stomach clench when they reached her. She kept her answers measured and truthful, at least mostly. She said she had no idea how Evelyn would have ingested such a substance, that the day had seemed normal until Evelyn collapsed. In the midst of the police chaos, Naya excused herself to the hospital restroom. She locked the door behind her and pulled out her phone, transferring the hidden camera's footage to a secure folder. A surge of triumph tinged with guilt flooded her. She had video evidence of Evelyn giving her the special cup, the subtle shift in expression, the quick glance around the table. The footage might be her lifeline if the family tried to pin Evelyn's poisoning on her. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and tension. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered, though her heart throbbed with the weight of her own deception. If Evelyn had been the one plotting, then ironically, she had fallen victim to her own scheme. But the rest of the family might not see it that way. And what about Liam? Was he a co-conspirator, or just another pawn in a very dark game? When Evelyn was transferred to the ICU, police officers inspected the Bellmont estate. They pored over security camera footage, searching for any sign of tampering with Evelyn's food or drink. But Naya knew they wouldn't find conclusive evidence in the official Bellmont security system. What they needed was her secret footage from the basement and her button cam from the brunch. As soon as she and Liam returned to the mansion, she slipped away to retrieve the tiny camera she'd placed near the locked basement door. Carefully dislodging it from its hiding place, she connected it to her laptop in a secluded corner of her bedroom. A jolt of alarm coursed through her as she watched the captured footage. Evelyn appeared each night between midnight and 1 a.m., inputting her code into the keypad. She would emerge with various boxes and vials, sometimes conferring with Harold. There was one clip in which Liam joined them, glancing around uneasily. Though he never touched the vials himself, he stood by, silent and complicit. Naya's heart twisted in confusion. The man she loved, the man who claimed to cherish her, seemed deeply involved in clandestine activities. Although the camera lacked audio, the body language spoke volumes. Liam stood there, arms crossed, watching as Evelyn and Harold handled containers that looked suspiciously like chemicals or drugs. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Naya saved the footage. The police needed to see this. But she also feared the blowback. Would the Bellmonts retaliate if she exposed them? Was she signing her own death warrant by unveiling these secrets? In the midst of her moral dilemma, she heard footsteps. Hurriedly, she closed her laptop and pretended to be tidying up. Liam entered, looking haggard, his hair disheveled. "Naya," he said quietly, "my mother's still in critical condition. The police want to question us again tomorrow." He paused, eyes flicking to her laptop. "What are you doing?" She forced a calm expression. "Just checking emails. I'm so sorry about your mom. This is terrible." He nodded, sagging onto the bed. "It is." For a moment, remorse filled his gaze. Are you sure you're all right, Naya? You've been through so much lately." "I'm fine," she lied, resisting the urge to confront him with the footage she had just watched. If he was part of the conspiracy, she needed to tread carefully until she could prove it. So she set aside her laptop, slid next to him, and gently rested a hand on his shoulder. She felt his tension but also sensed an inner conflict, as if he wanted to confide in her but couldn't find the words. They stayed like that in silence, each privately grappling with the family's tangled web of secrets and the knowledge that the next steps could shatter everything. Days passed before Evelyn regained consciousness, but she remained in a precarious state. At the hospital, her room was closely guarded by both medical staff and policemen seeking answers about her poisoning. One afternoon, while the rest of the family hovered outside, Naya managed to get a few private minutes by Evelyn's bedside. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, sunken with exhaustion. She looked frilier than ever, a stark contrast to the regal woman who had presided over the Bellmont estate. The faint beep of monitors filled the silence. Carefully, Naya pulled up a chair, her heart pounding. She had so many questions, about the family, about Isabel, about the basement. She swallowed, forcing herself to speak. "Evelyn," she began softly, "I'm so sorry this happened. Can you tell me what went on at that brunch?" A flicker of anger crossed Evelyn's eyes, but it was tempered by weakness. Her hand twitched on the bedsheet, as though she wanted to reach for Naya but lacked the strength. After a beat, she whispered, voice raspy, "You're smarter than the rest. I underestimated you." Naya's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, her words barely audible. "We saw how Liam adored you. But we couldn't risk another scandal. Marcus's wife, Isabel, she started asking questions, wouldn't leave well enough alone. Liam's father made sure it looked like natural causes. We had no choice. Naya felt a surge of nausea. You did it to protect your family's reputation? Evelyn's eyes drifted shut for a moment. She forced them open again, the glimmer of an old arrogance returning. Everything the Bellmonts built needed preserving. She coughed, a spasm of pain crossing her face. If you had just stayed oblivious, we wouldn't be here. Tears welled in Naya's eyes, not out of pity but frustration and disbelief. You tried to kill me because I asked questions? A faint scoff escaped Evelyn's lips, a cruel echo of her former haughtiness. We told you not to pry. Another fit of coughing seized her. Then she said, barely above a whisper, your sip was meant to be your last. Naya's breath caught. So, it was real, this monstrous plan had indeed been orchestrated by Evelyn, possibly Harold, maybe even Liam. She leaned forward, pressing gently, was Liam involved? Tell me. But Evelyn only let out a ragged breath. Her eyes fluttered one last time before she slipped into unconsciousness again. Naya was left there, stunned, her mind spinning. She had her partial confession, but it was incomplete. She still didn't know the depth of Liam's role, or how far the rabbit hole went. But one thing was clear, the Bellmonts had done this before, and they had planned to do it again. Evelyn's partial confession, along with the toxicology report, was enough to embolden the police to dig deeper. They questioned Naya extensively, and although she withheld the details of her camera footage at first, she eventually realized that cooperating might be her only path to safety. She handed over both sets of footage, the brunch button cam and the secret basement recordings. With this evidence, law enforcement executed a search warrant on the Bellmont estate. Within days, they discovered an array of chemical substances carefully hidden behind that locked basement door, including traces of scopolamine. Logs and notes hinted at prior uses, even referencing Bellmont, an unmistakable nod to Isabel. The next morning, the police arrived to detain Liam, Harold, and a few other family members for questioning. Naya watched from an upstairs window as Liam, handcuffed, was led to a squad car. Her heart twisted at the sight of her husband's defeated expression. She couldn't tell if it was guilt, betrayal, or simply shock. But the illusions of love and trust she once held vanished like smoke in the face of undeniable evidence. As the car doors slammed shut, neighbors gathered at the end of the driveway, whispering and snapping photos. The Bellmont dynasty was being stripped of its veneer of respectability, laid bare for the world to see. Naya felt a swirl of emotions, grief for the marriage she had believed in, relief that she was no longer in immediate danger, and a tremor of fear at what the future held. Evelyn remained hospitalized, unarrested only because she hovered between life and death. But the doctor confided in Naya that once Evelyn recovered, she would likely face legal charges. The Bellmont estate, once a bastion of prestige, was now a crime scene. And Naya, a once naive new bride, stood at the center of a maelstrom of scandal. She recalled Evelyn's last words, "You're smarter than the rest." A bitter satisfaction tinged her sorrow. She had survived, but at what cost? In the weeks following the arrests, a series of bombshell revelations emerged. Lawyers, bankers, and investigators flooded the Bellmont estate, poring over financial documents. Amid the chaos, Naya discovered that Evelyn, in her sedated state before the brunch, had signed over a significant portion of the family's holdings to her, part of a newly updated estate plan that was meant to appear benign. A bewildered Naya consulted an attorney. "How is it possible that she signed it over to me?" she asked, scanning the legal documents. The attorney, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, sighed. "It seems there was some attempt to position you as a co-owner so that, in the event something happened to you, the property would revert back to the rest of the family with minimal legal hurdles. But ironically, the documents as filed leave you with a controlling interest. She likely never expected you to outlive her attempts." Naya sat back, stunned. She had become the inheritor of much of the Bellmont empire, a twist that left her reeling. The estate's value was astronomical: land holdings, businesses, stock portfolios. Even the mansion, with all its dark corridors and secrets, was in her name. The family, of course, was furious. Various cousins and uncles lined up to contest the documents, but the law was stubbornly on Naya's side. She attended hearing after hearing, each time providing consistent testimony and producing the validated documents. News outlets latched onto the bizarre scenario: a mother-in-law allegedly trying to poison her son's wife, only to end up signing the estate over to the intended victim. In quiet moments, Naya wandered the halls of the mansion, still grappling with the ghosts of its past. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors once trod by generations of Bellmonts who had believed they were untouchable. Now, the person they had tried to eliminate owned everything. The irony wasn't lost on her. Despite her newfound power, Naya felt more alone than ever. She had outplayed them, yes, but the cost was staggering. She carried the weight of what might have been a real marriage had the family not been consumed by their lethal need to maintain control. And still, she worried about the possibility of retaliation from any Bellmont loyalists. The media's storm surrounding the Bellmont poison scandal showed no sign of abating. Paparazzi camped outside the estate gates. Journalists clamored for interviews with the miracle wife who had outsmarted her in-laws. Her attorney advised her to make a public statement to quell the feeding frenzy. On a brisk afternoon, Naya stood at a podium set up in the estate's courtyard. Cameras flashed incessantly, and a low murmur of voices filled the air. She took a moment to center herself, recalling all she had endured, from the slashed wedding gown to the hidden cameras to Evelyn's chilling confession. "Good afternoon," she began, voice resonating through the microphones. "My name is Naya Bellmont. First, I want to express my gratitude to the medical professionals and law enforcement officers who have worked tirelessly these past weeks." She glanced at her prepared statement, hands steady despite the internal storm. "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as someone who survived. The Bellmont family has a long history, some of which has been revealed to be dark and tragic. While the investigation continues, I can confirm that evidence suggests there was a conspiracy to harm me, one that tragically backfired." Reporters shouted questions, but she pressed on. "I will cooperate fully with the authorities to ensure justice for anyone who suffered under these actions, including my late sister-in-law, Isabel, whose story may finally be heard. I'm also aware of the changes to the Bellmont estate, which now legally belongs to me. I will work with legal counsel to see how best to manage these assets responsibly." Her voice wavered slightly with emotion. "Please respect my privacy in the coming days as I navigate the fallout of these events." "Thank you." With that, she stepped back from the podium. The roar of reporters intensified, but security cleared a path. She managed to leave the courtyard with as much dignity as she could muster, aware that every camera angle would capture her stoic expression. Her speech instantly trended online as the public marveled at the extraordinary twist: the woman who had nearly been poisoned inheriting her would-be killer's fortune. A month later, the dust began to settle. Liam faced conspiracy charges, along with Harold and several other relatives who had played roles in the attempted poisoning and in Isabel's death. Evelyn remained hospitalized, her fate uncertain. Meanwhile, the Bellmont estate, that sprawling monument to both opulence and corruption, stood eerily quiet under Naya's ownership. One late afternoon, Naya found herself in Evelyn's old sitting room, overlooking the manicured gardens. It was furnished with lush couches and ornate bookshelves, a testament to the family's refined taste. She carried a tray with a porcelain teacup, the same special heirloom Evelyn had once extended to her, and settled onto the couch. It felt surreal to be in possession of the very instrument once meant to seal her doom. She leaned her head back, recalling the moment she pretended to sip Evelyn's poison tea. The swirl of bitterness and adrenaline she'd tasted that day still lingered in her memory. If she had drunk from that cup, she might not be alive to see this day. Instead, the plan had backfired, the poisoners had become the poisoned. "Just one sip," she murmured, letting the steam from her tea rise against her face. A wave of relief washed over her. She was alive, free from the menacing presence of the Bellmont conspiracy. Across the room, a large portrait of Evelyn stared at her, regal and unyielding even in oil and canvas form. Naya exhaled slowly. It only took one sip, she whispered to the silent walls, and they drank their own poison. In that moment, she felt a strange blend of triumph and sorrow. She'd inherited an empire, but it was built on the Bellmont's dark legacy. Now, she had the choice to reshape it or dismantle it altogether. Rising from the couch, she set the teacup aside and gazed at the painting one last time. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the room. Though the future was uncertain, Naya knew she had survived trials that would have destroyed most people. She was still standing, stronger and wiser, ready to write the next chapter of her life, on her own terms. And so ended the twisted saga of a family that plotted to rid themselves of an inquisitive daughter-in-law, only to be undone by their own machinations. The last sip had changed everything, and a single act of courage had brought a century-old legacy of secrets crashing down. The end.